Imagine a river. Not just any river, but one that flows not with water, but with moments. Each droplet is a second, a minute, an hour, all rushing forward in a single, silent, inexorable stream. This is the river of time. It flows from a source we cannot see, a past shrouded in mist, and empties into an ocean we cannot fathom, a future that is forever out of reach. We are all adrift in this river, carried along by its current, our lives just a brief passage from one bank to the other. But what if? What if you could do more than just float? What if you could build a vessel, a small, quiet craft not to sail across the river, but to travel along its length? To journey upstream against the current, back into the mists of yesterday, or to surge ahead into the shimmering, uncertain waters of tomorrow. What if time travel were possible? It is a thought that has captivated us for ages. A dream whispered in the quiet hours of the night. To see the past with our own eyes, to witness history unfold, to perhaps speak with those we have lost. Or to glimpse the future, to know what lies ahead, to see the world that will be born from our present. But this journey is not without its perils. The river of time is not a simple, placid stream. It has eddies, whirlpools, and strange currents that can trap the unwary traveler. These are the paradoxes of time travel. They are not monsters or obstacles to be fought, but rather deep, philosophical puzzles, logical knots that challenge our very understanding of reality, of cause and effect, of who we are. Tonight, we will not try to solve these paradoxes with cold, hard equations. Instead, we will drift through them, like a boat through a series of strange and beautiful fog banks. We will explore them through stories, through gentle contemplation, and through the quiet poetry of thought. We will listen to the questions they ask, not for the sake of finding answers, but for the wonder of the questions themselves. So find a comfortable place. Let your mind grow still. Let the sounds of your world fade away, replaced by the gentle, flowing current of our journey. We are about to embark on a voyage into the heart of time itself, to navigate its most mysterious and mind-bending currents. There is no need to stay awake for the entire journey. If you feel the pull of sleep, let it take you. Perhaps you will dream of your own travels along this endless river. Our exploration begins now, with the most famous, most tangled, and most personal of all the temporal knots, the grandfather paradox. Imagine a young woman named Alara. She is a historian, but not in the way we understand. She doesn't just read books. She lives in a time when the past is a place you can visit. Her specialty is the early 20th century, a time of great upheaval and quiet, everyday beauty that fascinates her. More than anything, she is fascinated by her own family history and by the story of her grandfather, a man she never met, who died long before she was born. His name was Arthur, and all she has of him are a few faded photographs and a collection of letters he wrote to his future wife, her grandmother, Eleanor. In the photos, he has a kind, gentle smile. In the letters, his words are full of hope and a quiet strength that saw him through difficult times. Alara feels a deep connection to this man, this ghost in her family tree. She decides to use her vessel, her time machine, to do what no historian has ever truly been able to do, to meet him. She sets her coordinates for a specific day in the spring of 1925. It is the day, according to family lore, that Arthur and Eleanor met for the first time at a small town fair. She wants only to see it, to be a silent observer, a ghost from the future witnessing the beautiful, simple spark that would eventually lead to her own existence. She arrives. The air smells of popcorn and damp earth. The sounds are a gentle cacophony of laughter, calliope music, and the distant rumble of a steam train. It is everything she imagined, and then she sees him. Arthur, he is younger than in the photographs, his smile just as kind, but with a touch of youthful uncertainty. He is walking towards the very spot where he is supposed to meet Elinor, who is just now buying a ribbon from a stall nearby. Ilara's heart swells. This is it, the moment. She stays hidden behind a large oak tree, content to just watch. But as Arthur walks, a child chasing a runaway ball suddenly darts into his path. Arthur, ever the kind soul, stumbles to avoid the child. He falls, twisting his ankle badly. He cries out in pain. People rush to help. Ilara watches, her own heart pounding, as they carry him to a first aid tent. Elinor, distracted by the commotion, turns to look, but she never sees the young man with the kind smile. She finishes her purchase and after a moment walks away in the opposite direction. The moment is gone. They never meet. Ilara rushes back to her machine, a cold dread creeping into her soul. She tells herself it will be fine. Perhaps they met another day. But when she returns to her own time, the world is subtly wrong. Her apartment is not her own. Her books on history are gone. And when she looks for her family records, she finds no mention of her own name. No mention of her parents. Arthur went on to live a life, and Elinor did too, but they lived them apart. They never married. They never had the children who would become Ilara's parents. And so Ilara was never born, but here is the knot. Here is the paradox. If Ilara was never born, how could she have grown up to become a historian? How could she have built a time machine? How could she have traveled back to that spring day in 1925? Who was it that stumbled out of the machine and inadvertently caused Arthur to miss his fateful meeting? If her action in the past erased her own existence, then that action could never have been taken in the first place. The cause, Ilara's journey, negates the very conditions that allow the cause to exist. It's a snake eating its own tail, a sentence that erases itself as it is being written. This is the grandfather paradox. It's a perfect, logical contradiction. A leads to B, which leads to C, but C prevents A from ever happening. The entire chain of events collapses into impossibility. For a long time, this paradox was seen as a definitive argument against the possibility of backward time travel. It seems to create a fortress of logic that no time traveler could ever breach. If changing the past leads to a contradiction, then the past simply cannot be changed. But the river of time may be more clever than we think. Perhaps it has ways of resolving such contradictions, ways of smoothing out the ripples before they become tidal waves. One idea is that of a self-correcting timeline. In this view, the river of time has a powerful current, a tendency to flow along a certain path. Small changes might be possible, but the major events, the keystones of history, are protected. If Ilara had tried to prevent her grandparents from meeting, the universe might have conspired against her. Perhaps the child's ball would have rolled in a different direction. Perhaps a sudden downpour would have sent both Arthur and Elinor seeking shelter under the same awning, ensuring their meeting. In this model, you cannot change the past because the past, in a way, refuses to be changed. Your actions would either fail, or worse, become the very instrument of the event you sought to prevent. We will explore this darker possibility later. Another, more profound and perhaps more beautiful solution is the idea of branching timelines, often called the many worlds interpretation. Imagine that the river of time is not a single channel, but a vast, branching delta. Every time a choice is made, every time an event could go one way or another, the river splits. A new timeline, a new universe is born for each possible outcome. When Alara travels back and prevents her grandparents from meeting, she doesn't change her own past. That is impossible. Her past is fixed. It has already happened. It is the river she came from. Instead, her arrival creates a new branch in the river. She has stepped out of her timeline and into a new one. In this new timeline, this alternate universe, Arthur and Elinor do not meet. A different future unfolds, one in which Alara is never born. She is now an anomaly, a visitor from a timeline that no longer connects to this one. She is a temporal refugee, stranded in a world that is not her own, a world she accidentally created. Her own timeline, the one where she was born, still exists. It flows on, unchanged, but she can never return to it. She has pruned her own branch from the family tree in this new reality, but her original branch remains intact, far away, in a universe she has left forever. The grandfather paradox, then, is not a wall, but a doorway to an infinite number of other worlds, other possibilities. It doesn't prohibit time travel, it just makes it an act of profound creation, and perhaps profound loss. Every trip to the past is a one-way journey, a farewell to the world you knew. And so we leave Alara, a ghost in a strange land, a living paradox herself. Her story teaches us that the past is not a simple line of dominoes that we can reset. It is a delicate, intricate web, and to touch one thread is to risk unraveling it all, or perhaps to weave an entirely new tapestry, one where we have no place. As we drift away from this idea, let's consider the other side of this coin. What if the web is so strong, so perfectly woven, that no matter how hard you pull on a thread, you only ever succeed in making the pattern tighter? This leads us to the haunting idea of a fixed timeline and the predestination paradox. Imagine another traveler. His name is Kale. He is not a historian, but a man haunted by a memory. When he was a boy, a terrible fire swept through his childhood home. He escaped, but his beloved older brother did not. The memory of the smoke, the heat, the sound of the sirens, it has been the defining tragedy of his life. He has spent years, decades, building his temporal vessel for one purpose and one purpose only: to go back and stop that fire. He knows the exact date and time. He knows the cause, or at least what the fire marshals concluded: a faulty wire in an old lamp in the study. His plan is simple. He will arrive an hour before the fire starts, find the lamp, and simply unplug it. A small, simple act to rewrite the greatest tragedy of his life and bring his brother back. He makes the journey. He arrives in the familiar quiet of his old home. It is just as he remembers it, frozen in time. The air is still. He feels a pang of nostalgia, a deep ache for this lost world. He shakes it off. He has a mission. He creeps into the study. The lamp is there on his father's desk. It looks so innocuous. He reaches for the plug, but just as his fingers touch the cord, he hears a floorboard creak upstairs. It's his younger self, getting a drink of water. Panic seizes him. He can't be seen. He ducks behind the desk, pulling the lamp with him. In his haste, the lamp topples over. It crashes to the floor. The old, brittle bulb shatters. The filament, still hot, falls onto a pile of old newspapers his father had left there. A tiny wisp of smoke curls upwards. Kale watches in horror. He tries to stamp it out, but the dry paper catches instantly. A small flame blossoms, then another. It licks at the curtains. He scrambles for a way to put it out, but it's too late. The smoke is already thickening. The heat is already rising. He hears his younger self shout from the hallway. He hears his brother call his name. He has no choice but to flee, to stumble out into the night and watch, for a second time, as his home is consumed by fire. He returns to his own time, broken, only to find that nothing has changed. His brother is still gone. The tragedy is still the cornerstone of his life, but now he carries a new, terrible burden. The knowledge that the faulty wire was a lie, a best guess by the investigators. The fire didn't start on its own. He started it. His attempt to prevent the tragedy was the very thing that caused it. His journey into the past was not a new event. It was always a part of that night. He was always the ghost in the house, the stumbling figure who knocked over the lamp. He didn't change the past, he fulfilled it. This is the predestination paradox. It is a causal loop, but one with a tragic, ironic twist. It suggests that the timeline is fixed, immutable. The river of time flows in a single, unchangeable channel. You can travel upstream. You can move about in the waters of the past, but whatever you do, you have already done. Your actions are already woven into the tapestry of history. You are not an agent of change, but an actor in a play speaking lines you have always been destined to speak. In this model, there is no possibility of a grandfather paradox. You cannot kill your grandfather because if you existed to make the attempt, then you must have failed. Perhaps your gun would jam. Perhaps you would have a change of heart. Or perhaps, most chillingly, your attempt to kill him would somehow cause him to meet your grandmother, an event that would not have happened otherwise. You would become the very architect of your own existence, all while trying to erase it. This paradox resolves the logical contradiction of changing the past by simply making it impossible. Free will in this context is an illusion. Your choices are your own, but they will always and have always led to the same outcome. The universe is deterministic. The beginning and the end are already written. This idea is deeply unsettling for many. It robs us of our agency, our hope of making a different choice, of creating a better future. But for some physicists, it is an elegant solution. It is called the Novikov self-consistency principle, named after the Russian physicist Igor Dmitrievich Novikov. He proposed that the laws of physics must be self-consistent. Any event that would create a paradox, any change to the past that would unravel causality, is simply forbidden by these laws. The probability of such an event is zero. So, for a time traveler in a predestined universe, the past is like a museum. You can look, you can walk around, you can even interact with the exhibits, but you cannot change the display. In fact, your footprints on the floor and your breath on the glass were always part of the museum's history. This paradox forces us to confront some of the deepest philosophical questions. If our lives are predetermined, what is the meaning of our struggles, our triumphs, our love, and our grief? Are we simply puppets dancing on cosmic strings? Perhaps not. Perhaps predestination is not about a lack of choice, but about the nature of time itself. From our perspective, floating down the river, we see only the present moment. The past is behind us, the future is unknown. But what if, to the universe, to a being outside the river, all of time is visible at once? The past, present, and future exist simultaneously, like a single, vast landscape. A time traveler is not changing the landscape, but simply visiting a different part of it. The landscape has always been as it is. Cale's journey was not a new path, but a trail that was always there on the map, a tragic circle leading back to itself. The predestination paradox is a somber, melancholic tune. It speaks of fate, of loops, and of the sorrow of knowing that even with the power to walk through time, Some wounds can never be healed because we were the ones who inflicted them in the first place. As we drift from the sorrow of Cale's story, a new question emerges. Cale's actions had a source, his grief. But what if something could exist within one of these loops without any source at all? What if an object or an idea could be trapped in a causal loop, forever causing its own existence, with no beginning and no end? This leads us to one of the most baffling paradoxes of all, the bootstrap paradox. Imagine a man named Leo. He is a brilliant but struggling physicist in the year 2080. He is obsessed with the concept of time travel, and he has dedicated his life to creating a unified theory that would make it possible. But he is stuck. There is a series of equations, a final, crucial insight that eludes him. One day, an old, weathered journal appears on his desk. He doesn't know how it got there. Inside, written in a frail, shaky hand, is the complete, elegant solution to his problem. The very equations he has been searching for. At the end of the journal is a single, cryptic instruction. You must ensure this book is passed on. Using the equations from the journal, Leo successfully builds a time machine. He becomes famous, his name etched into history as the father of temporal mechanics. He lives a long and full life, always cherishing the mysterious journal that made it all possible. As he grows old, his hands begin to shake. He realizes that the handwriting in the journal, which once seemed so alien, is now hauntingly familiar. It is his own. On the final day of his life, understanding what he must do, he takes a fresh journal and carefully, with his now frail hand, copies the equations from the old one. He then uses his time machine for one last journey, traveling back 60 years to his own laboratory. He places the new journal on the desk of his younger, struggling self. And then, his purpose fulfilled, he simply fades away, his energy spent. Now, consider the information contained in that journal, the revolutionary equations. Where did they come from? Leo, as a young man, learned them from the journal. And Leo, as an old man, wrote them down in the journal. The information is trapped in a perfect, self-sustaining loop. It was never discovered. It was never created. It has no origin. It simply is. This is the bootstrap paradox, also known as an ontological paradox. Ontology is the philosophical study of being, of existence. This paradox questions the very being of an object or a piece of information. It's named after a phrase, to pull oneself up by one's bootstraps, which means to achieve something without any external help. In this case, the information is literally pulling itself into existence. Let's trace the loop again, slowly. The equations exist in the future because they were received from the past. They exist in the past because they were sent from the future. It's a closed circuit. There is no point where the information enters the loop from the outside. This paradox is profoundly disturbing to our understanding of causality and creation. We believe that everything has a beginning. A book has an author. A symphony has a composer. An invention has an inventor. The bootstrap paradox presents us with a book that has no true author, a symphony with no composer. Let's imagine another version of the story. A time traveler is a great admirer of Shakespeare. He travels back to Elizabethan England with a complete collection of Shakespeare's plays, hoping to get them signed. But when he arrives, he discovers to his horror that William Shakespeare is just an ordinary, uninspired stable boy. There are no plays, no sonnets. Fearing that he will erase the greatest works of English literature from history, the time traveler finds a publisher and has the plays printed under the stable boy's name. So, who wrote Hamlet? Not the time traveler, he was just quoting them. Not the stable boy, he never had the inspiration. The plays of Shakespeare in this scenario wrote themselves. This paradox challenges some of the most fundamental laws of physics. The second law of thermodynamics, for example, tells us that entropy or disorder in a closed system always increases. Things break down, they don't spontaneously assemble. Information degrades over time. It doesn't just circle endlessly without corruption. In our story of Leo, every time he copies the journal, tiny errors might creep in. His handwriting would be slightly different. Over countless loops, the equations might become unreadable, a garbled mess. The book itself would age, its pages yellowing, its binding crumbling until it turned to dust. How can an object survive an infinite number of journeys through time? Perhaps the loop isn't infinite. Perhaps it only needs to exist long enough to be stable within a consistent timeline. The universe in this view allows for these strange, self-contained artifacts as long as they don't break any larger laws. They are like temporal curiosities, objects out of time, existing without a conventional cause. Or perhaps, like the other paradoxes, this one is telling us something fundamental about the nature of time. If time is not a straight line, but a more complex, four-dimensional structure, then a loop is not as paradoxical as it seems. It's just a particular shape within that structure, a path that circles back on itself. From within the loop, it seems impossible, but from an outside perspective, it is just a complete, self-consistent pattern. The bootstrap paradox leaves us in a state of quiet wonder. It forces us to ask, does everything need a beginning? Could some things, some ideas, some beautiful pieces of music be eternal, echoing through time in a loop of their own making? It suggests a universe that is not only stranger than we imagine, but stranger than we can imagine. A universe where the greatest discovery might not be a new invention, but an old one found in a dusty book that appears on your desk one day, written in a hand that you will one day recognize as your own. We have seen the dangers of changing the past, the sorrow of fulfilling it, and the mystery of objects with no origin. Now let's turn our attention to the sheer, unpredictable magnitude of change itself. What if the smallest, most insignificant alteration to the past could have catastrophic, world-altering consequences? This is the fear that lies at the heart of the most famous concept in time travel fiction, a concept born from science but nurtured in imagination, the butterfly effect. Imagine a man named Simon. He lives a quiet, unassuming life. He's not haunted by a great tragedy or driven by a grand ambition. He is simply filled with a small, persistent regret. 20 years ago, on the day he proposed to the love of his life, Sarah, he was nervous and awkward. He fumbled his words, he dropped the ring. She said yes, and they have had a happy life together, but he has always wished he could relive that one moment to make it perfect, to give her the beautiful memory she deserved. Now in his time, personal temporal devices are available, though heavily regulated. They are meant for observation only. But Simon finds a way to bypass the safety protocols. He sets his device for that park bench 20 years ago. His plan is simple. He won't interact. He will just watch his younger self, and when the moment comes, he will whisper the eloquent, beautiful words he has practiced for 2 decades into his younger self's ear, using a discrete radio frequency. He arrives. The park is just as he remembers. He sees his younger self, a bundle of nerves waiting for Sarah. He sees her arrive, her smile as bright as the sun. The moment comes. Younger Simon begins to speak, and just as he starts to stammer, Simon whispers the words, "My dearest Sarah, from the moment I met you." His younger self pauses, a look of confusion on his face, as if hearing a distant voice. But then he smiles and repeats the words flawlessly, beautifully. He kneels, he presents the ring without dropping it. "It is perfect," Sarah weeps with joy. Mission accomplished. Simon returns to his own time, a deep sense of satisfaction warming his heart. He steps out of his machine into his living room, but something is wrong. The furniture is different. The photos on the wall are of people he doesn't recognize. A woman he has never seen before walks into the room. She asks him who he is and what he is doing in her house. Panic sets in. He asks about Sarah. The woman gives him a strange look. She knows a Sarah, but she is married to a man named Mark. Simon runs out into the street. The world is almost the same, but fundamentally altered. The names of streets are different. The architecture has subtle changes. The headlines on the news are about events he has never heard of. He has a new identity, a new job, a new life he doesn't recognize. In this world, he and Sarah never built a life together. What happened? His change was so small, so insignificant. How could it have erased his entire world? He begins to investigate, using the historical archives of this new timeline. He finds the thread. His perfect, eloquent proposal didn't just impress Sarah. It was overheard by a young man sitting on a nearby bench, a struggling writer named Mark. Mark was so moved by the words that he wrote them down. He used them in a novel he was writing. That novel, with its powerful, romantic prose, became a runaway bestseller. It made Mark famous and wealthy. And a few years later, at a book signing, he met a woman named Sarah who was a fan of his work. They fell in love. They married. Simon's small act of correction, his whisper on the wind, created a ripple. That ripple, a tiny change in the initial conditions of that day, spread outwards, growing larger and larger as it traveled through time. It changed the course of Mark's life, which in turn changed the course of Sarah's life, which in turn changed Simon's. And it didn't stop there. Mark's success influenced countless other people, their choices, their lives, creating more ripples, an ever-expanding cascade of change that subtly reshaped the entire world. This is the butterfly effect. The name comes from a concept in chaos theory, beautifully summarized by the question: does the flap of a butterfly's wings in Brazil set off a tornado in Texas? It's not a logical paradox like the ones we've discussed before. It's a paradox of predictability. Chaos theory tells us that in complex, dynamic systems, like the weather or human history, tiny, seemingly insignificant changes in the initial conditions can lead to wildly different and unpredictable outcomes later on. The system is so sensitive that it is impossible to know the full consequences of any action. When a time traveler goes to the past, they are tampering with the initial conditions of a fantastically complex system. Stepping on a bug, displacing a single blade of grass, even their own breathing changing the air currents. Any of these could be the butterfly's wing flap that, over decades, builds into a tornado. This makes time travel an act of terrifying irresponsibility. You could go back to fix a small problem and return to a world of unimaginable horror. Or you could go back to kill a terrible dictator and return to a world ruled by someone even worse, someone who rose to power in the vacuum you created. You can never know. The variables are infinite, the connections are invisible. The butterfly effect suggests that perhaps the only safe way to travel to the past is to be a true ghost, utterly disconnected from the world, unable to interact in any way. But even then, could your presence alone, Your body's faint gravitational pull, or the heat it radiates, be enough to nudge a single atom from its path and change the course of destiny. This idea has a certain poetry to it. It speaks to the profound interconnectedness of all things. It tells us that nothing is truly insignificant. Every small kindness, every careless word, every choice we make, sends ripples out into the world, into the river of time, in ways we can never fully comprehend. It's a humbling thought. We are all time travelers in a way, moving forward 1 second at a time, and the butterflies of our actions are flapping their wings with every breath we take. The world we will live in tomorrow is being shaped by the gentle breezes we create today. Simon, in his quest for a perfect moment, learned this lesson in the most heartbreaking way. He learned that you cannot change just one thing. The web of causality is not a series of individual threads, but a single, unbroken cloth. To pull on one thread is to pull on them all. As we journey through these strange currents of time, we find our ideas of the world and ourselves becoming less certain. We've questioned causality, fate, and origins. Now we must turn this questioning lens inward, upon the traveler. If the world can be so drastically altered, what happens to the identity of the person who altered it? What does it mean to be you, when everything that defines you can be changed? This brings us to a paradox that is not about time travel itself, but about the very nature of identity, a puzzle that has haunted philosophers for millennia, the ship of Theseus. Let us begin with a story, not of the future, but of the ancient past. Imagine the city of Athens, gleaming under a golden sun. In its harbor rests a famous ship. It is the ship of Theseus, the great hero who sailed to Crete and slew the Minotaur. The ship is a monument, a vessel of pride for all Athenians. But the ship is old. It is made of wood, and the years, the sun, and the salt water have taken their toll. A plank in the hull begins to rot. To preserve their treasured artifact, the Athenians carefully remove the rotting plank and replace it with a new one, identical in every way. A year later, the mast splinters in a storm. It too is replaced. Slowly, piece by piece, over the course of a century, every single part of the ship, every oar, every sail, every nail and beam, is replaced with a new one. The ship still floats in the harbor. It looks the same. It is still called the ship of Theseus. But now a question hangs in the air, a question whispered by philosophers in the shade of the Parthenon. Is this still the same ship? If you say yes, then you believe that identity is not tied to the physical material. It is tied to the form, the function, the pattern, the name. The continuity of its existence is what matters. But then the philosopher proposes a second part to the puzzle. What if, he says, someone had been collecting all the old, discarded planks? What if they took all those original pieces of wood and in a workshop across the bay reassembled them? Now there are two ships. One in the harbor, made of all new parts, and one in the workshop, made of all the original parts. Which one is the true ship of Theseus? The one in the harbor has the continuous history, the unbroken presence as the city's monument. The one in the workshop has the original matter, the very atoms that Theseus himself touched. The paradox pulls our intuition in two different directions at once. There seems to be no right answer. Now let us bring this ancient puzzle into our journey through time. The time traveler is the ship. Consider Elara, from our first story, who accidentally erased herself from a new timeline. She is now an object with no history in the world she occupies. Is she still Elara? Her memories, her physical body, come from a timeline that, to this world, never existed. She is a ship made entirely of planks from an invisible forest. Her identity is defined by a past that is no longer real. Or consider a more subtle change. A time traveler goes back to their own childhood and gives their younger self some good advice. Study harder. Be kinder to your parents. Learn to play the piano. They return to their own time to find their life is better. They are more successful, their relationships are stronger, and they can play beautiful music. But their memories have changed. The struggles they once remembered are gone, replaced by memories of diligent study. The arguments with their parents are replaced with memories of harmony. Are they the same person who stepped into the time machine? They have a different past, different memories, different skills. Their brain has different neural pathways. The very fabric of their consciousness has been rewoven. Like the ship, their parts have been gradually replaced, not with wood but with new experiences. At what point in this gradual replacement do they cease to be the person they were? This isn't just a philosophical game. It strikes at the heart of what we consider to be ourself. Is my identity my body? If so, we are already like the ship of Theseus. Our cells are constantly dying and being replaced. The you of today is made of almost entirely different matter than the you of 7 years ago. Is identity then our memories? If so, what about amnesia? Or the subtle, constant editing and forgetting that our brains perform every day? Is identity our story, the narrative we tell ourselves about our life? A time traveler who changes their past is fundamentally changing their own story. The ship of Theseus paradox suggests that identity is not a fixed, solid thing. It is more like a process, a pattern that persists through change. The ship in the harbor maintains its ship of Theseus-ness because of its continuous role and form. Perhaps a person's identity is similar. We are a pattern of thoughts, memories, and behaviors that maintains a certain coherence over time, even as the constituent parts change. But time travel throws this into chaos. It allows for radical, instantaneous replacement. The reassembled ship in the workshop is a powerful metaphor. What if a time traveler could meet an alternate version of themselves from a timeline where they made different choices? Which one is the real you? The paradox shows us that perhaps there is no single real you. There are just different versions, different assemblies of the same initial parts, all with a legitimate, if different, claim to the same name. This paradox doesn't offer a solution. It offers a new way of seeing. It asks us to let go of the idea of a solid, unchanging self. We are all ships sailing on the river of time, constantly being rebuilt by the waters we pass through. And for a time traveler, that rebuilding can be sudden, total, and utterly disorienting. They are a living testament to the puzzle, a being who must constantly ask themselves the most fundamental question of all: who am I? Our journey has taken us through the logical tangles of changing the past and the philosophical fog of identity. Now, we must turn to a paradox that challenges our most basic assumption about the river of time itself, the idea that it flows at the same speed for everyone. We have been imagining time as a single, universal current. But what if it's more like a real river, with fast channels and slow, deep pools? This is the strange reality unveiled by one of the most famous thought experiments in physics, one that is not science fiction but science fact: the twin paradox. Imagine two twins, equally young, vibrant, and full of dreams. Let's call them Aster and Tara. Aster is an astronaut filled with a desire to see the stars. Tara is a biologist, content to study the wonders of life on Earth. On their 25th birthday, they say a difficult goodbye. Aster is embarking on an incredible journey. She will pilot a starship to a distant star system and back. Her ship is a marvel of engineering, capable of traveling at speeds approaching the speed of light. The journey, for her, will take 10 years. 5 years to reach the star, and 5 years to return. She promises to send messages back to Terra whenever she can. Aster's ship launches, a brilliant spear of light piercing the sky. Terra watches until it is gone and then returns to her life, her work, her own journey through time on planet Earth. For Aster, time aboard the ship passes as it always does. She eats, she sleeps, she works. The seconds tick by, the days turn into weeks, the weeks into years. She explores the new star system, a breathtaking adventure. After 5 years have passed on her ship's clock, she turns around and begins the long voyage home. Another 5 years pass, and finally, she sees the familiar blue marble of Earth growing in her viewport. She is 35 years old, eager to see her twin sister again after a decade apart. Her ship lands. She steps out and the world feels old. The buildings are different, more advanced. The fashion is strange, and waiting for her on the landing pad is an old woman with kind, familiar eyes and hair as white as snow. It is Terra. Terra is not 35. She is 85 years old. While 10 years passed for Aster on her high-speed journey, 60 years have passed on Earth. The messages she sent, which felt like they were sent months apart, were received by Terra years apart. Terra has lived a full life. She married, had children, and even grandchildren. She became a celebrated scientist. She has watched civilizations rise and fall on the evening news. And all this time, her twin sister has aged only 10 years. This is the twin paradox. It is not a logical contradiction, but a paradox in the sense that it violently contradicts our everyday, intuitive experience of time. How can two twins born on the same day end up with a 60-year age gap? The answer lies in Albert Einstein's theory of special relativity. One of its core principles is that time is not absolute, it is relative. Its passage depends on your motion. The faster you move through space, the slower you move through time relative to a stationary observer. This isn't just a theory, it's a measurable, verified fact. GPS satellites which orbit the Earth at high speeds have to constantly adjust their clocks to account for this effect, known as time dilation. If they didn't, their navigation signals would be off by several miles every single day. For Aster, traveling at, say, 99.5% the speed of light, time slowed down dramatically. From her perspective, everything was normal. But from Terra's perspective on Earth, Aster's clock was ticking at about 1/10 the speed of hers. So for every 10 years that passed for Terra, only 1 year passed for Aster. But here is where the paradox part comes in. A clever student of relativity might ask, but isn't motion relative? From Aster's perspective in the ship, isn't it the Earth that is moving away from her at near light speed? So shouldn't she see Terra's clock as running slow? Shouldn't she return to find Terra younger than her? This is the brilliant knot of the paradox. And the resolution lies in a single, crucial difference between the twins' journeys. Terra stayed in one place, in a single inertial frame of reference. Aster did not. To make the round trip, she had to accelerate to high speed, decelerate to stop at the star, accelerate again to come home, and finally decelerate to land on Earth. It is this acceleration, this change in motion, that breaks the symmetry. It is the accelerating twin who experiences the lesser passage of time. The twin paradox shows us that time travel into the future is not just a fantasy. It is physically possible. If we could build a ship that could travel fast enough, We could journey for a year and return to an Earth centuries or even millennia in the future. We would become travelers in time, stepping into a world that has moved on without us. This form of time travel is a one-way street. There is no going back. And it comes with a profound emotional cost. It is a journey of ultimate separation. To travel into the future is to lose everyone and everything you have ever known. It is to become a living relic, a visitor from a bygone era, forever disconnected from your own time. The paradox forces us to abandon our comfortable notion of a single, universal now. Astor's now and Terra's now were different. Time is personal. The river flows at different rates for different travelers. This realization is both dizzying and liberating. It opens up the cosmos not just as a vast expanse of space, but as a vast expanse of time, with futures waiting to be reached, not by waiting, but by flying. It's a journey that offers the stars, but at the cost of the earth. We have navigated the treacherous waters of changing the past, the eerie calm of fixed timelines, the bottomless mystery of origins, the shocking power of small actions, the shifting shores of identity, and the fluid currents of time itself. Our journey now leads us into the realm of knowledge and expectation. What if the future is not something to be changed or visited, but something to be known? And what if the very act of knowing the future makes it impossible? This is the labyrinthine logic of the paradox of the unexpected hanging. Let us imagine a prisoner. He is condemned and sits in a cold, stone cell. The warden visits him on a Sunday evening. The warden is known to be a man of his word, a man who has never lied. He tells the prisoner, "You will be hanged at noon on one of the next 5 days, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday." However, and here the warden leans in, a strange glint in his eye, the hanging will be a surprise. You will not know the day of your hanging until the executioner walks into your cell at noon. The warden leaves. The prisoner, though condemned, is a logician. He begins to think, a small spark of hope kindling in his mind. He seeks to find a flaw in the warden's statement, a contradiction that will save him. He starts his reasoning at the end of the week. The hanging cannot be on Friday, he thinks, because if I am still alive on Thursday evening, I will know that the hanging must be on Friday. There are no other days left, but if I know it will be on Friday, it will not be a surprise. And the warden said it would be a surprise. Therefore, Friday is impossible. He smiled, feeling a surge of confidence. He has eliminated one of the days. Now, he continues, since Friday is impossible, the last possible day for the hanging is Thursday. But wait, if I am still alive on Wednesday evening, and I know that Friday is not an option, then I will know that the hanging must be on Thursday. But this would mean it's not a surprise. So Thursday is also impossible. The prisoner's heart begins to beat faster. The logic is a key, unlocking one day at a time. He applies the same reasoning again. Since Thursday and Friday are impossible, the last possible day is Wednesday. But if he makes it to Tuesday evening, he will know Wednesday is the day, which violates the surprise condition. So Wednesday is out. The dominoes fall, one by one. The same logic eliminates Tuesday. The last possible day is Monday. But if the hanging can only be on Monday, then he knows it today on Sunday. It would not be a surprise at all. The prisoner leaps to his feet, a triumphant shout echoing in his cell. "It's a contradiction," he exclaims. "The hanging cannot happen." The warden's two statements, that it will happen on one of the 5 days and that it will be a surprise, are mutually exclusive. I am safe. He sleeps soundly that night, convinced by the power of his own impeccable logic. And then on Wednesday at noon, the executioner walks into his cell. The prisoner is completely and utterly surprised. And so the warden's prophecy was fulfilled. The hanging happened, and it was a surprise. But how can this be? The prisoner's logic seemed flawless. Where did he go wrong? This is the paradox of the unexpected hanging. It pits a seemingly perfect logical deduction against a real-world outcome that proves the deduction wrong. The paradox lies in the slippery nature of the word surprise and the self-referential nature of the prisoner's knowledge. The prisoner's reasoning relies on his ability to know, at some future point, what he will know. He assumes that on Thursday evening, he can be certain that he will be surprised on Friday. But this is where the logic begins to fray. The warden's statement creates a situation where the prisoner's own knowledge becomes a variable in the equation. One way to look at it is that the prisoner's initial premise, that he can trust the warden's statement, is what leads him astray. He trusts that both parts of the statement are true. But his deduction proves that they can't both be true. So at that point, he should no longer be able to trust the warden's statement. If he can't trust it, he can't be sure the hanging will be a surprise, which means he can't eliminate Friday, which means his entire chain of logic collapses. Another perspective is that the paradox highlights the difference between a formal logical system and the messy reality of human knowledge and belief. The prisoner is reasoning within a closed system of logic, but the executioner exists outside that system. The executioner doesn't care about the prisoner's deductions. He just follows his orders. The surprise happens because the prisoner's belief in his own logic makes him vulnerable. He becomes certain that the hanging cannot happen. This certainty is precisely what allows the hanging to be a surprise. If he had remained uncertain, if he had thought, "My logic is clever, but maybe I'm missing something," then the hanging would have been less of a surprise, but his logic would have been less powerful. This paradox connects deeply to our journey through time. It is a paradox about knowing the future. If a time traveler goes to the future and sees an event, and then returns to the present with that knowledge, can the event still unfold in the same way? The act of knowing the future changes the present. The prisoner's knowledge that the hanging was impossible was what made the surprise hanging possible. The paradox of the unexpected hanging is not easily resolved. It remains a subject of debate among philosophers and logicians. It doesn't give us a clear answer, but it does give us a profound insight. It shows that knowledge, belief, and surprise are deeply intertwined. It teaches us that sometimes, the more certain we are about the future, the more vulnerable we are to being surprised by it. And it leaves us with the unsettling thought that even the most perfect logic can be undone by the simple, unpredictable act of a door swinging open at noon. Our journey has shown us that time can be changed or fixed. That identity can be fluid. That knowledge of the future is a tangled knot. Now we turn to a paradox that examines the very nature of change itself, not in a sudden, dramatic event, but in slow, creeping, imperceptible increments. It asks a simple, almost childlike question that unravels our understanding of how we define the world. This is the Sorites paradox, or the paradox of the heap. Imagine you are standing on a vast, empty plain. In front of you lies a single grain of sand. I ask you, is this a heap of sand? You would, of course, say no. A single grain is not a heap. I then add one more grain of sand. There are now 2 grains. Is this a heap? I ask again. You would still say no. 2 grains of sand are just 2 grains of sand. I add another. And another, and another. Each time I add just one single grain, I ask you the same question. At some point, you will be looking at a substantial pile of sand, a collection that anyone would agree is a heap. But the paradox is this: at what exact point did it become a heap? Can you identify the single grain of sand that tipped the balance? The one grain that transformed a non-heap into a heap? It seems impossible. The logic goes like this. One grain of sand is not a heap. If you have a collection of grains that is not a heap, adding just one more grain cannot turn it into a heap. If you accept both of these premises, then you can start with one grain and add trillions more, and you will never logically arrive at a heap. Yet, we know that heaps exist. Our eyes tell us so. The paradox arises from the conflict between this seemingly flawless, step-by-step logic and the undeniable reality of our perception. This is the Sorites paradox, from the Greek word soros, meaning heap. It is a paradox of vagueness. The word heap is a vague predicate. There is no sharp, clear boundary that defines it. The same is true for so many words we use every day. Consider the color spectrum. Red slowly fades into orange. There is no single wavelength where it stops being red and suddenly becomes orange. Consider a person's age. A 1-year-old is not old. If a person is not old, then their next birthday will not make them old. By this logic, a person can never become old. Consider wealth. A person with $1 is not rich. Adding $1 to someone who is not rich will not make them rich. The Sorites paradox reveals a fundamental mismatch between our language and the world. Our language often wants to draw sharp lines, to put things into neat boxes, heap or not heap, red or orange, old or young, rich or poor. But the world reality itself is often a smooth, continuous gradient. There are no sharp lines. How does this ancient puzzle relate to our journey through time? It connects directly to the butterfly effect, but from a different angle. The butterfly effect deals with the unpredictable consequences of a small change. The Sorites paradox deals with the very definition of what constitutes a change. Imagine a time traveler who wants to alter the past, but only a tiny bit. They go back and move a single grain of sand on a beach. Have they changed history? Intuitively, we would say no. That's an insignificant change. What if they move 2 grains? Or 10 or 1,000? At what point does the insignificant change become a significant one? At what point does moving sand on a beach in the Cretaceous period become the cause of a different future? The Sorites paradox shows us that there may be no clear answer. The concept of a significant change is as vague as the concept of a heap. This has profound implications. It means we can't draw a neat line between safe and unsafe alterations of the past. The transition from a harmless modification to a world-altering catastrophe might be a smooth, continuous gradient. The time traveler is like the person adding grains of sand, never knowing which grain will be the one that, in the grand scheme of things, finally constitutes a heap of consequences. Philosophers have proposed various ways to grapple with this paradox. Some say that there is, in fact, a sharp line, but we just don't know where it is. There is a specific number of grains that makes a heap. It's just that our knowledge is too fuzzy to find it. This is called epistemicism. Others suggest we need a different kind of logic, a fuzzy logic, where things can be partially true. A pile of 100 grains might be 0.1 true that it's a heap, while a pile of 10,000 grains might be 0.9 true. This allows for the gradual transition that our intuition tells us is real. Still, others argue that the context matters. What counts as a heap for an ant is different from what counts as a heap for a construction worker. The meaning of our vague words shifts depending on our purpose and environment. The Sorites paradox is a quiet and subtle one, but it is deeply unsettling. It pulls at the very threads of how we construct our reality through language. It tells us that the world is not as black and white as our words would have us believe. It is a world of shades, of gradients, of slow and imperceptible becoming. For the time traveler, it is a final, humbling lesson. The power to travel through time does not grant the power of perfect definition. The past and the changes one might make to it are not a series of clear, distinct events, but a continuous flow. And in trying to change just one small part of it, one might never know when they have added the single grain of sand that changes everything. Our long journey is drawing to a close. We have sailed the river of time, from its mists of origin to its uncertain future. We have navigated the whirlpools of paradox, each one pulling us deeper into the mysteries of existence. We have walked with Alara in the past, stood with Kale in the ashes of his making, and held Leo's timeless journal in our hands. We have felt the world shift under Simon's feet, questioned our own reflection with the ship of Theseus, and watched the stars with the lonely, time-traveling twin. We have sat in the prisoner's cell, grappling with the nature of surprise, and stood on the plain of sand, watching a heap grow, grain by imperceptible grain. These paradoxes, these stories, are more than just clever thought experiments. They are mirrors. In the grandfather paradox, we see our fear of our own insignificance, the worry that our existence is a fragile accident. In the predestination paradox, we see our struggle with fate and free will, the question of whether we are the authors of our stories or merely actors. In the bootstrap paradox, we confront the unsettling idea that some things may exist without reason, without a clear beginning, challenging our deep-seated need for causes and explanations. The butterfly effect reminds us of our profound interconnectedness, the immense and unknowable power held within our smallest choices. The ship of Theseus holds up a mirror to our own fluid identities, asking us who we are in the constant flow of change. The twin paradox shatters our solid, comfortable notion of time itself, revealing it to be a personal, malleable current. And the final paradoxes of the hanging and the heap show us the limits of our own knowledge and language, the fuzziness of the categories we use to make sense of a world that is fundamentally seamless and gradual. We began this journey seeking to understand time travel. But perhaps in the end, we have come to understand ourselves a little better. These paradoxes are not external problems to be solved. They are echoes of the paradoxes within us. We live with the paradox of wanting the freedom to choose our future, while also wanting the security of knowing that everything will be all right. We grapple with our identity, feeling like the same person we were 10 years ago, even though every cell in our body and many of our thoughts have changed. We make choices every day, blissfully unaware of the vast, chaotic web of consequences they might set in motion. There is no need to find a single answer to any of these questions tonight. The beauty of these paradoxes is not in their solution, but in their ability to open our minds. They invite us to be comfortable with uncertainty, to find a strange peace in the vastness of what we do not know. They encourage a sense of wonder. The river of time flows on, silent and deep. It carries our present into the past and draws the future towards us. We are all its passengers. Perhaps one day, humanity will build the vessels we have imagined tonight, and these paradoxes will become practical problems for temporal engineers. But for now, they are ours to ponder in the quiet moments. They are stories to tell ourselves as we drift off to sleep. So let the current take you now. Let these thoughts dissolve into the gentle rhythm of your breathing. The paradoxes will wait. The river will continue to flow. And you can rest, adrift in its peaceful, mysterious, and endless stream. Good night.